Welcome to our Prairie to Page review. The Wilder pageant is excited to have a series of guests here to review the American Masters program that just aired on PBS. We'll start with introductions. Our first guest is Sarah Uthoff.
Hi, my name is Sarah Uthoff, and I am the force behind Trundlebed Tales that you can find all around the web, on social media, on YouTube, on my blog, on my podcast, and where we look at the truth and the myth and the imagination of Laura Ingalls Wilder. And what I have been doing during this close down is I have been working on my book. I have created a new program for that we can do over Zoom. I have been scanning a bunch of Laura pictures, and I have been doing a couple of programs, like one for the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library, and that is probably more than you wanted to know about me.
Do you have any thoughts, initial thoughts on the program that just aired?
Well, I hadn't seen it before. This was my first time through. So I really haven't had too much time to think about it, and I was live tweeting, which makes it hard to see. But I'd have to say it was a fairly well-rounded discussion about Laura. They definitely covered the problems people have been having lately about her depiction of Native Americans and the minstrel show, but it wasn't all that. And I was kind of afraid there'd be a big weight over it. And the way it was handled was very nicely done. And I'd have to say I was overall pleased with the result.
Okay, we'll move on to our next guest, Nicolas Inman.
Hi, I'm Nicolas Inman. I have the honor of being the director at the Laura Ingalls Wilder Home and Museum in Mansfield, Missouri. And during the last 6 months, I wish that I could say that I'd been relaxing, but I've actually been working on projects related to Mrs. Wilder. The staff has been working tirelessly trying to find new and inventive ways to bring in a new generation to learn about the legacy of Laura Ingalls Wilder. This year in Mansfield, we didn't have any school visits from the public school system, so we're trying to find ways to engage the audience more electronically. And so that's how I've spent my last 6 months, and also working with a club called the Thursday Club out of Marshfield, Missouri, which Mrs. Wilder spoke to twice, putting together a compilation of their memories of some of their members of Mrs. Wilder's visit to their club. So it's really been an exciting time to work on new and fresh projects associated with Mrs. Wilder. My initial reaction was positive in watching the documentary tonight. I would have liked to have seen a few of the interviews from those I know that they conducted with those who knew Mrs. Wilder, but maybe we will see that later in bonus material or something. But I think they did a fabulous job laying everything out, and kudos to everybody who was involved, and especially several on this program tonight who were interviewed.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our next guest, Amy Foster.
Hi, I'm Amy. I am the director here at Walnut Grove. I've been here for 22 years now. So it's great to be here. I'm sitting in the gift store right now with snow all around us. So it's great to see everyone. And I thought the show was great tonight. Camera footage was awesome. The drone work too was great to see our own Plum Creek from that direction, which I've never seen. So I was very pleased with it.
Okay, thank you. Our next guest is Tessa Flak.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tessa Flak, and I am the executive director at the Laura Ingalls Wilder Memorial Society in Smet, South Dakota. I actually started my 6th year now, so it's been a great time. I used to work in Burr Oak, Iowa as well, close to where I grew up. I was a tour guide there as well as a board member, so my past in Laura has been very extensive at the sites. I thought the film was very well rounded. They really touched on each of the different aspects that we try to focus on our tours. Her books from the view of young Laura, we have her real life, and then the TV show. And so we try to separate out each of those aspects. And I thought that incorporated a nice mixture throughout the entire documentary. I thought it was a great overview of her entire life, that of Rose, her family. I love the pieces that they included on Pa's history as well as Ma's. You know, all of those little pieces really drew it all in together, and I think it worked out really well. It was a nice combination of everything. So it really encompassed her entire life. So that I was very pleased with it. It was more than I thought would have been possible with what was available, you know, this year and last year and everything. So it was terrific.
Thank you. Next, we have Dean Butler.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening to the panel. My name is Dean Butler, and I've been involved with the Laura Ingalls Wilder community, with the world of Laura, for 41 years, since being cast to play Almanzo Wilder. And I'll note that I am correctly pronouncing Almanzo's name, unlike the way we did it in the series years ago. But I've been involved with it for 41 years, and it has been one of the great joys of my life to be associated with Laura. Through the years, I've done dozens and dozens of appearances of Laura Ingalls Wilder sites and other locations around the country. I've produced 2 full-length documentaries about Laura, various aspects of Laura's life, 8 hours of DVD bonus content in support of the series. I acquired the Pa's Fiddle recording label to keep the music of Laura alive. Back in 2015, and produced a PBS special called Pa's Fiddle, the Music of America, back in 2012 to support that music. And in the last year, back in 2014, I was able to narrate a 6-part documentary produced by a wonderful producer named Gary Leva called The Little House Phenomenon, which was part of the 40th anniversary release of the series. During the last 6 months, I've been at home, laying low, working on some other projects, but back in the early part of the pandemic, I was proud to join Alison and Arngrim on her Facebook channel to read from the Little House books, which was a great joy. I got to read Farmer Boy and The Long Winter and These Happy Golden Years, and it was a real source of comfort to be able to connect to the Little House community. In regards to Prairie to Page, I loved the show. I think it substantiates, perhaps more than ever before, Laura's extensive creative process that she went through to write these books. She didn't just fall out of bed and write the books. This was an effort. It was hard work. It was committed. And she did the work to give children a view of American frontier life that was among the first ever offered by a woman in American publishing. I just would say, bottom line, loved it. And we saw that Laura was indeed an artist. I'm very proud to be associated with it.
I'd like to jump in there quick, just in case anybody wants to see Dean's reading or Alison's reading. They are still on Alison's Facebook page, and you can go back and listen to any of the books, and you can join her still most days at 3:30, and it's great fun. So I hope I see all of you there.
I think we'll move on now to Barb Mays Boustead.
Hi. Thank you. I feel like I'm sandwiched between giants here. My name is Barb Mays Boustead, and I am the most recent past president of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Legacy and Research Association. That's a bit of a mouthful, but we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving the legacy and history of Laura Ingalls Wilder and her family. My day job is actually as a meteorologist, and I've spent quite a bit of time researching the weather and climate that's in Laura Ingalls Wilder's books and life. And I guess that gets a bit into what I've been up to the last 6 months. I have moved. I have taken my job fully remote, as many people have during the pandemic. I've also been doing a lot of Zooming and recording of videos related to Laura Ingalls Wilder. People are very attracted to the story of Laura Ingalls Wilder right now. So I've done a number of features with the home sites, and some with other communities, just trying to bring a little piece of it to them. And I'm also working on a book too. So, Sarah, we should trade some notes, I guess. I thought that the PBS special was really heartwarming. I think that was the first word that came to me. It was just, it was well grounded. It was honest. I thought it was well balanced, and I think it made you feel good about growing up liking and enjoying these stories, and also recognizing that they were complicated, and that Laura and Rose were complicated, and that's okay. You can like complicated things.
Okay, thank you. Our next guest is Alison Arngrim.
Hello. Hi. I'm Alison Arngrim. And yes, 46 years of being involved with the Little House on the Prairie phenomenon. I got part of Nellie Olson back in 1974. It was on the series for 7 years. I've gotten very involved. Over the years, I have learned so much about Laura and the books and the whole real life of the thing, because when I got the show, I had not read the books as a child. So I came totally from the other angle and then gradually learned about the history of it. Since the pandemic hit, I literally sat on the floor right over there and said, what the heck am I going to do? And then I said, I think I'll read the Little House books, because what I wanted to do was go back and read all of the Little House books, going from Little House in the Big Woods all the way through the first 4 years, and see how the characters develop. And then why not do it on Facebook? So pretty much every day since late March, I have been reading on Facebook every afternoon. I got through all of the Laura books. I got through a bunch of the Rose books. I read quite a bit of Bill Anderson's books. I had Dean Butler come in. He's like, I'm doing the long winter. Yes, you are. And so he came in and read, and it's been quite something. And I'm still currently being a trader. I'm reading Anne of Green Gables. But we've been working our way through all the history. And we talk about it, and the people comment, and we have a whole conversation about what it all means. The documentary's super, super thorough, and it's always difficult because a lot of people come to the books and to the life of the real Laura because of the show, and kind of go into shock when they find out that, no, this is real, this was a real person, and it wasn't like the show, and some of her life wasn't even like the books, and this sort of blows people's minds, and I think they handled it very, very well.
Yes, thank you. And then our last guest, but certainly not least, is William Anderson.
Good to be here with everyone tonight. And I've been a Little House aficionado since I heard these books read by my third grade teacher, and others of them read by my fourth grade teacher, and more of them read by my fifth grade teacher. This was rite of passage in so many elementary schools throughout the country. I had no idea until more recent years that was the norm. And those books were great storytelling for us, but we had no idea that we were also learning valuable U.S. history. And since those days in elementary school, I've researched the Ingalls and Wilder families, I have written books on the subject, and I've been able to be involved with the development and preservation of the Wilder homesteads, home sites, in various ways. And it's been a real pleasure witnessing those places evolve and become such important literary landmarks. The film, I thought, was an expert juxtaposition of literary and historical views into the lives of the Ingalls and Wilders. The film's almost a museum into the home sites and the artifacts that still remain. And I never cease to marvel how much is left of this Ingalls family for us to learn from and enjoy, even all these years after they lived those lives that we love so much in the books. During COVID, what did I do? Yes, I thought about the long winter and the privations that Almanzo Wilder and his brother and the Ingalls family underwent in the Smet, Dakota Territory. So what I did was I wrote a book, which has been delayed by COVID, but that's a small hardship compared to what other families have endured. I wrote a magazine article for a wonderful new magazine called Our America, which was a real pleasure to do. I stayed in touch with a lot of people. I reconnected with people that go way back to my college days, and I stayed at home. So that was my COVID life.
Thank you for sharing. Moving on, we're going to get into some discussion about the Prairie to Page program. To start, I'd like you guys to comment on the accuracy of the PBS American Masters special on the portrayal of Laura Ingalls Wilder's writings and life as to both the content and the tone.
You just want us to just jump in, Wendy?
Yes, you can just jump in.
Just jump in? All right, well, I think others will have a great deal to say about this. I'll start quickly and just say, I don't think that Laura's life was nearly as ordered as she wrote about it. And knowing how harsh the elements can be when you're out in them on your own, I believe there was much more deprivation and hardship than the way Laura wrote it, although certainly in books like The Long Winter, you got a sense of it. But I think there was a lot more of that. In Plum Creek, with the grasshoppers and so on, there are deprivations, but I think their life was really hard and much harder than she suggested it was as she wrote it. But as others have said about her, Laura saw the beauty in all things. And so she found a way to share her life and ordered her life in the books in a way that gave it a logical progression forward and made it understandable and inspiring for legions of readers who have been reading these books since 1932. I thought so how accurate was the portrayal of her life? I think they did in the movie tonight. I think they did a splendid job of laying out Laura's life, and I think, as I said earlier, I really appreciated the fact that the books or that the movie tonight really revealed much more about Laura's writing process than perhaps I'd ever really seen before in an organized way. So I loved the portrayal.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
One of the things I can add. Who's jumping? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Me? Okay. One of the things I really liked was when they talked about the fact that she was really a writer, and they brought up Walden Pond and Thoreau and all these other authors. I have always felt a little put out that Laura did not really get the credit she deserved for being a real writer, that she should be in the same category as people like Mark Twain. That because the books were so emotionally compelling and people read them as children and got very pulled in and suspended all disbelief, there's a huge segment of readers who really believed that she wasn't a writer, that she just kind of, my memory book, as they said on the show, that she was just writing down what happened when she was a kid, and that the books are absolutely exactly what happened and what everybody said, which of course we know they are not. And when you realize what really happened, and yes, the terrible deprivation, nearly starving to death, and the huge chunks of her life that didn't get into the books, and the terrible, violent and unpleasant things that went on in the 1800s, that she created this cohesive thing and this family, and these are characters. Caroline in the books isn't really like her mother, and Paul isn't really like her pa, as they said, running out on his debts. She created fictional characters that represented the ideals that she wanted her family to represent. She created plot lines. She took some stories from her dad and from her mom and some things that happened, but she made it up. She wrote novels. She created a whole series of novels and a whole structure and this whole saga of these people, some of whom weren't real. She wrote this. It's not just, isn't that cute that little girl remembered Christmas with Mr. Edwards? No, she was a legitimate, serious author who really worked very hard to create this whole saga, and just deserves as much respect and a place in American literature history as Mark Twain and anyone else. And she doesn't always get that. Like I said, people feel like she fell out of bed and just wrote this, that it's just some cute childhood memory, and it's not. It's a very, very complex, constructed series of novels. And that's one of the things I got out of it when I started like reading them all back to back, going, whoa, where is this going? You see how it changes. And I'm hoping that people will notice that point and that she will get the proper respect as a writer that she deserves.
I really appreciated the treatment of Rose Wilder Lane and her input in these books. It's been called ghostwriting, which I never adhered to. And John Miller and I had many, many discussions about this, and we finally concurred that the writing of the Little House books was a collaboration between Wilder and Lane. And many times Wilder bristled at some of Rose's suggestions, and Rose patiently worked through it with her mother. She always considered those books to be her mother's books. And whether it was from modesty or, as I mentioned in the film, it was not the thing to do for an adult novelist or mainstream magazine writer to dabble in children's books. The field was minuscule in the 1930s and 40s compared with children's book publishing today. So I really appreciated it getting out there to the public this evening a very fair assessment of what happened in the creative mode of the Little House book writings.
There have been so many books and so much information out there on Rose's part in the Little House books. You can clearly see, if you read any of Rose's writings and Laura's writings, the differences that both writers have. I know Rose's, a lot of her work was kind of mentioned as yellow journalism. And you can clearly see the separation of both writers, their different styles, the different tones of the books. I mean, Rose had a very big impact, I think, on encouraging her mother to continue to write, but they were very different people with very different styles, and we could just do a whole different documentary on Rose Wilder Lane, because there's so much out there, and I don't think that there's enough on Rose and everything as well. I mean, they're just very different. And so I did appreciate that the film had included so much on Rose and her encouragement and the differences that mother and daughter had. I think that was a very important aspect that they included in there. And so I appreciate that a bunch.
Tessa, I agree with you. Excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay, Bill. I was going to add one small point. I mean, as a scientist, I appreciate the evidence basis of the research that has come across about Laura Ingalls Wilder and others around her through the years. And through the conference that we host, it's called Laurapalooza, Sounds Silly, Serious Conference, a lot of the pieces of evidence that found their way into this documentary have been presented in pieces at Laurapalooza and have appeared in books through time. And so seeing them all collected together, I thought was really, I think it showed us that they're following the evidence through the creation of this documentary and also weaving them together. It's two pieces of it, the pieces of evidence there and the storytelling that even the documentary used to weave it all together. I really thought that made it feel very credible and accurate and fact-based, to the best that we can say now anyway.
I really thought that I liked the tone of the documentary. It seemed like it was very respectful, like this really is a serious writer. And so many times you get people dismissing Laura's work as she was just this kid's writer, as if that wasn't real writing. And I think they treated her with respect throughout the whole program. And I have to say, I was very, very impressed at that. And I think it would be great if we could get some of the other 200 hours of footage that they took out there, because they got a lot of good stuff, and there's only so much you can fit in 90 minutes.
Yeah. I really appreciated their honest portrayal of the roses and the thorns in Mrs. Wilder's life. She might not have liked to have aired her dirty laundry, so to speak, but the fact, as Alison mentioned, about Paul running out on his debts, the loss of her brother and the heartache involved with that. I mean, all these things played into the woman that she became. And so I really liked the honesty in that. And I'll tag off what Bill mentioned about John Miller. It was really nice to see John included in the documentary, to hear his voice again. And Barb, speaking of Laura Palooza, I thought of you every time they mentioned grasshopper weather and your presentation from Laura Palooza. So they did a great job of really giving an honest portrayal, a complete picture of the story of Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything to add to that prompt?
Well, I'd like to say that 200 hours of material. I made a post on the Wilder Home and Museum Facebook page today, and I threw in a little quirky piece of humor. What's next? A Little House talk show? And there we go.
We're here.
We can all co-host an episode. The heck with the Tonight Show.
I like that there were touches of humor in even the documentary when they talked about the show, and they said, and that's not Pa, and immediately cut to one of the iconic shots of Michael Landon third off. It's like, yes. Also, I thought Dean and I looked fabulous. I just wanted to say that.
Always.
You did, yeah.
Very excited about that. Yeah, it's good. But that's the thing. It's a similar thing we've found with the show. People think we were the characters on the show, that it was real. The number of times people go, well, where's the town? And they mean the set. They mean the set in Simi Valley. And they're talking about, but that's Walnut Grove. No, Walnut Grove is an actual real town in Minnesota where people live. But what is it in the post office and the thing? No, that's the set in Simi Valley. And it's real. And they did that with her book. So, I sympathize with Laura being seen as as the character from her own books. And it's funny about Rose, reading the books in order finally and doing that whole thing on Facebook. As I started reading Rose, I was sort of like, whoa, that's a completely different style, isn't it? And the impression I got was a lot of Rose's writing, because that whole Let the Hurricane Roar with Molly and David, that are sort of Laura Almanzo, but not really kind of thing. There was this sort of what would have been a hip, cool style in the 30s. She has Molly saying to the baby, like, who's my little man? And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, they didn't talk like that. Whereas Laura went with a more straightforward, sort of almost classic, not hip, not stylish for the 30s, but just, no, I'm not going to do the cute, stylish things and put in the slang. I'm going to just do this. And that's why we're reading those books now today, and not maybe so much of the Roses, which were terribly cool at the time.
Okay. I think Alison,
I always wondered, did those people know what conjunctions were? Dialogue, they were so formal, particularly Ma, and it was by no means local vernacular. Laura was very precise in the language presented by her family as they conversed.
Okay. Now let's discuss what new information or speculation does the video biography add to the current body of films and writings about Laura Ingalls Wilder?
Well, I would say that it's really presenting it to a new audience rather than being new information. I don't think they were pulling any 60-minute interview kind of things. It really was, I think, summarizing and saying here to people. And even maybe some of the listeners tonight may not realize that every place that Laura lived is now a museum. And you can visit them. They have gift shops where you can buy stuff. You can go to Alison's gift shop and get bonnets and tin cups and all that jazz. So I think that it's just telling this story that Laura was a real person and this is what happened, aiming it at a different audience than normally gets it. And to a lot of people, a lot of times have people come up to me and say they're a Laura fan. And when I was little, I kind of had a stock response to that. And now I always ask follow-up questions, because sometimes when people say they're a Laura fan, it means they've done a lot of research. Sometimes it means that they have read the Rose books that are the spin-off series when she was a kid. And there's just a whole lot in between of what people mean when they say Laura fan. So I hope this kind of gets the reality out there a little bit more.
I definitely agree with you there, Sarah. I think this will trigger more people to go out and read more. I definitely recommend, Pioneer Girl. You can see some of the original manuscript. You have Prairie Fires, all of the other biographies on Laura. There's so much available. There's so much info that this documentary only just briefly touched on each of those aspects. It's just a short synopsis of all of the other work that's out there. But it's a nice combination of all the different pieces, and I think it'll really draw in more visitors to each of the home sites. I think in the next few years, we'll see a big increase in visitors, for getting the books, stopping at the sites, taking those tours. And while watching the film tonight, we, in our tours, we have about 10 minutes where we quickly go through Laura's travels. And as you could see tonight on the documentary, it took an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, just to briefly touch on some of those things. So there's so much more out there that this isn't new information. I know it was a little surprised that Pa had, kind of signed his name, that, he declared himself a pauper, and that was new information to people. But there's so much out there that was available already that I encourage everyone to go and see, and then go back and rewatch the documentary. There's so much to learn.
Yeah.
I agree with Sarah and with Tessa. I think that's what's great about the American Master series is PBS takes these individuals who we would consider national treasures and allow multi-generations to sit in front of the television set, analyze their life, look at new aspects, and it may not have all been new material, but PBS just did a great job with the story of Mae West, and I was able to sit with my daughter and watch that and teach her about someone from American history she might never have been exposed to. So I hope tonight that there were people just like that who maybe were fans of the television show or read the books years ago who've not been able to travel around the country to visit our sites. We site directors have been meeting by Zoom occasionally, and we are all looking forward to the push that comes from tonight's presentation. So I hope that maybe there were new insights that were absorbed by a new generation of individuals. And Alison, you mentioned that how many fans were looking for the town site. You'd be surprised how many people visit Rocky Ridge and want to know where Albert's bedroom was located. So, I'll just throw that in there. And they argue with you about it.
Right? I bring up the bonnet because right now, obviously with the pandemic, all of these fabulous sites with the fabulous tours and the fabulous museums can't do what they're doing, and the big pageant to Smet and the big pageant in Walnut Grove can't do it because they're shut down, pandemic, can't have big crowds. But all of these places have websites, and all of their websites have fabulous gift shops where you can get my book, you can get Melissa Gilbert's book, you can get all the Laura Ingalls books, and you can get bonnets and tin cups and many lovely, lovely things. And yes, I have a little shop, of course, where I will sell you all sorts of autographed swag and bonnets. But it's really nice. You can support all of these Laura Ingalls historical homes by simply going to their website and making your little gift purchases there. This is huge stuff. You can get all kinds of bonnets and historical things and fun things and toys for the kids, and you can help these people stay in business until we all reopen.
And you can also join LIWLRA, that's the Laura Ingalls Wilder Legacy and Research Association. Anybody can join. Any memberships support the activities we do that in turn support the home sites as well, and liwlra.org. So I hope that we do bring in folks who maybe didn't know that this world of people who do this a lot is out there. There might be people who don't know all the research bits that we all do because we sort of spend a lot of time listening to each other. Because like you've all said ahead of me, we aren't probably revealing a lot of new research here in this documentary to us who do the research. We are probably revealing new pieces to people who are a lot more casual, informal listeners and readers and viewers. So I hope that folks have picked up on some of these pieces. For example, I saw quite a bit of traffic on Twitter during the documentary that folks they were glad to see that there are people addressing the problematic parts of Laura Ingalls Wilder's writings. And those of us who have been in this research community have seen it for years now that these are being addressed, that people are talking about it. So I'm glad to welcome them into this world we have and that we've created, and expand our bubble and make it a little bigger and bring in folks who are interested and didn't know that this stuff is out here. Let's bring them to the home sites. Let's bring them to Laura-palooza. Let's have them come to cast reunions and see that there's a lot of folks who have these interests too.
Okay. One side note from Facebook, Alison, they all really enjoyed your bonnet, by the way. Thank you for featuring that. There are some other questions from Facebook. One of the questions, and maybe Nick, Tessa, or Amy can comment on this. How can the Laura homesite museums tell more complete histories?
Well, I do want to mention, and I know we've kind of talked a little bit about what you can do right now during the pandemic and everything, whether it's reading Laura's books, reading Rose's books, but the Memorial Society, we put together and released a mobile app that came out in July. And so you can actually tour the historic homes in Smet. You can take our actual tour on the mobile app. There's a children's version as well. There's a ton of free tours. You can actually watch a presentation that Barb gave on there. I'll shortly be putting on videos of Bill. We're going to talk about Roger Lee McBride and his connection to the Little House books and Rose Wilder Lane and different pieces of that. So there's so much out there that you can do now while at home still with the pandemic. And so, there's just so much available at this time to look and see and do. But it's really important, especially, this year with the pandemic, to support the Little House sites, as we talked about, the stores, just becoming a member is really important as well, and continually thinking about us and everything. We're constantly working together. Most of the sites meet about twice a year and try to collaborate on different projects and programs and different pieces there. So we're always trying to stay connected and bring our fans new things. Most of our fans, about 50% have read maybe one or two of the Little House books, if we're lucky. Others have seen pieces of the TV show. You just never know. I know all of us have kind of touched a little bit on that tonight, but fans are at all levels. And this documentary really opened up quite a bit of new information, like Barb said, to all fans.
Yeah.
I would say to answer that question, at Rocky Ridge, actually I would just say watch the websites of each of the home sites, because we try to tell a complete picture by special exhibits and things that each site tries to bring to life. And at Rocky Ridge, a season ago, we had a special Rose tour where you could just take the tour and learn specifically about Rose and her life and how different aspects of her life in Mansfield and at the farm. This season, until the pandemic hit, we were doing a farm tour, which was just really specific to Mr. Wilder and the farm-related aspects that we don't often have time to mention on the tour. And they were they were very well accepted. And so I hope that we can go back to that when the pandemic's over, ways that people can learn additional information on these tours and these special exhibits that each site features. And so really watch those websites and Facebook pages for that information, because you may miss out on something that's only being offered for a short period of time.
And I'd like to really stress that if you want to visit these places, you have to help keep them going. So now is an excellent time to buy something from the gift shop, to make a donation. And if you go to the Trundlebed Tales YouTube page, I have a whole category of videos that is unboxing. So if you want to see some of the great stuff that you can get at the Laura home sites, watch that and order early and often from all the home sites. They all need help. the number of museums, not just Laura museums, but museums in general, who are looking to have to close after this year with the lack of income, it's just incredibly depressing. We need to keep the Laura museums going, so we can do that by buying stuff and sending donations and keep them going.
Yes. Nicolas, there's another comment on Facebook wondering if you will be posting other never before seen or rarely seen photos on your Facebook page or website.
Well, as Bill mentioned a post that he had made on the Facebook page earlier, we do try to do that. And Bill's really good in regards to the Rocky Ridge Facebook page to bring out different aspects of history in regards to the Wilder family, and use material maybe that we don't often get to showcase. So we like to do that from time to time, and with special exhibits to bring out pictures like this season. At Rocky Ridge, we have a special exhibit on Carrie, and we were able to bring items about Carrie and her life and pictures and items out of the collection that we don't normally get to showcase. And this next season, we're doing the world travels of Rose, and we're going to bring out many of the outfits that she wore around the world and pictures associated with that. So yeah, be watching for those things, because it's an opportunity to really absorb new information.
And Tessa, can you one more time repeat the name of the app that you were talking about a little bit ago?
Sure. It's the Discover Laura app. You can find it on the App Store, Google Play. You can actually go onto the website. It's discoverlaura.org/oncell. ONCELL.
Okay, thank you. We will hopefully get that posted to our page later. Let's move on to the next question. So how does this video biography change or solidify the place of Laura Ingalls Wilder as a defining female author of the American 20th century?
May I comment upon that?
We would love to hear from you, Bill.
As a person that has spent, I would say, most of my life in some way connected with the Wilder literature, first, as I told you, as a student and as a researcher, it made me so proud when I saw an advertisement recently that later on this series on American Masters will be seeing a Hemingway program. And I thought, Mrs. Wilder, you're up with the greats. And I used to call her a famous children's author. Then I would refer to her as an author of these wonderful little house books. But when I speak or refer to her now, I call her one of America's great authors. And I think that the American Masters status and the quality of that wonderful show we just saw really solidifies the fact that she is an American great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very much.
I think we take that for granted in the Wilder world.
We do. Yeah.
And
everybody should.
When we see that presented in this fashion, it reminds us of, wow, Mrs. Wilder truly is a magnificent writer of American history. And when we see visitors from around the world that make a trip just to our home sites because they're drawn into by her story, we're reminded that she wasn't just someone who lived in Mansfield. She had an international appeal and continues to speak to the hearts of readers all over the world.
Laura Ingalls Wilder is iconic. She is woven into the fabric of American culture. And yes, probably more so white American culture than the more multiracial American culture we have now. But even with that said, it's hard-pressed to find somebody who didn't go through an American school system and doesn't at least know the name Laura Ingalls Wilder or recognize Little House on the Prairie, the TV show. And because Laura is such a powerful author, she was able to become such a powerful part of our culture. If her writings and her stories had been mediocre, we wouldn't be having these conversations. She was a skilled craftsman and a compelling storyteller. And I think that her inclusion in the American Masters documentary series solidifies what many of us on this panel here already know and what others hopefully have come to see, that we could pick at some of the problems and issues that come up through her books and even in her life, and still have, we can still acknowledge that she is an important part of the foundation of our literature and our society.
I think it really pushed her position as being a writer of note. The Library of America a few years ago came out with an edition of her book, and that was another big thing that was really saying she was a famous writer. But in another way, she's almost beyond that, because, for example, there is a blizzard going right now, even as I speak. And if I was on Twitter, I am sure there would be people saying that it's just like Laura Ingalls Wilder, particularly if their power's gone out. But you see people calling, the weather about Laura. They say, oh, you're dressed like Laura. They say there are some dresses at Target right now. It's been making the rounds saying they look like Laura. And you just don't hear that with other writers. You don't say, oh, it's just like Hemingway, or boy, you're dressing like Mark Twain, unless you're in costume. So it really is a more part of our everyday culture. And I think it really says something great about how America views the past, is that we, the strong white male characters are still there. But if people are thinking about the past, even if it isn't the time period that Laura's from, you get them thinking about Laura. That is their first archetype of the past, a little girl in a functioning family. And I think that's really a powerful image across the American culture.
Yes. Okay.
Well, Colonel Sanders sort of dresses like Mark Twain. I'd like to just add something related to just connecting a little bit to the television series and Laura's books. I've felt very strongly about this for a long time, and Alison may have some opinions about this as well. I think that Michael Landon and Laura Ingalls Wilder, while they would certainly present radically differently to anybody who would see them, if you put them side by side, you'd say these two people have absolutely nothing in common. But when you read and see, when you see what Michael wrote and you read what Laura wrote, I'm always stunned by the connection the two have, the heart that the two have. And I think that the two expressions of Laura, her books and the television series based on her books, worked so in harmony with each other, despite the fact that stories obviously deviated wildly from what Laura wrote. But the tone of what Michael wrote was always so similar. Not always, but largely so similar to what Laura wrote. And I think that this is one of the reasons why people have loved both expressions of Laura for years and years and years. And I give Michael a lot of credit for tapping into and finding this, recognizing this material as something that he could communicate his love of family, his love of connectedness, his need for that was beautifully expressed through this work that is based on and inspired by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I just think two great artists at work here, and everyone, the readers and viewers, have been the lucky ones for it for years.
Yes.
When I first started in Smet, I heard so many different stories when the TV show first came out from people saying, that some of these older ladies in Smet were writing letters to Michael Landon, and the different producers saying that, it's not exactly what was in the books. It's not her real life. He's not sticking to the story. But what you have to remember is that Michael Landon was so good about coming through with the true values that Laura kept. Like you said, Dean, about family, community, pulling yourself out by your bootstraps. I mean, there were so many struggles that they encountered throughout their entire life that they stuck to the positives. They were always focusing on, what can we do? How can we help? This is life. And we can really remember that today with all the struggles that we're going through currently right now, that, so many people are going back and watching the TV show because of it. It's on every day, like you mentioned. There's just so much that you can take from it. Both the books, the TV show, both are so lovable that there isn't one versus the other. It's a whole combination.
Yes, I was there at that time, and I can remember
told me about it.
the skepticism there was amongst the Smet people. They went around very grumpily pointing out that this show should come to Smet now. They've been in Walnut Grove way too long. And also giving all those hundreds and hundreds of tours that we did in those days, we would almost have to be ready with plan B, because we would get what we called the TV people. And there was a big goal. They were the book people who knew every little knick-knack and gimrack that was in the historical house or would ask about it. And then we had the TV people who I remember particularly someone said, "Is that the stove that Laura sold the coal for to buy for Mom?" And I said, "No, that must be television." And it was hard for them to swallow that TV and the books were atoms apart.
Yeah.
Now the crazy thing is on our show we snuck in things from her real life, because they talked in the documentary about how Laura left things out of the books, like the death of her brother. And if you read the books, and you only read the books and you don't have any of the historical documents, you would not know that Charles and Caroline had a little boy who died in infancy. But oh look, surprise, there it was in the television show. So we kept sort of coming around, sneaking things in. This pandemic, people are going through such a horrible time. I mean, obviously people are faced with illness, people are dying, people are losing their jobs. There's a lot of people who wrote about deprivation and about snowstorms and about not having food, but boy, everybody's reading the Little House books and they're watching the show. And that's why when I started reading the books on Facebook, I was just amazed at how many people said, "This is what's getting me through this. I am stuck at home. Things are not good. They're not good at all. And I'm reading Little House books and I'm watching the TV show. And these values and the way that these characters, whether they be real or not, fought through these horrible, horrible circumstances and stuck together." And it really, really resonates with people. And boy, oh boy, are we seeing it now. And okay, one of my favorite stories, and it was at Walnut Grove, and I think Amy may have even told me this story, that very often women who love the books and love the show would bring along a husband or boyfriend who had not watched the show or read the books. And they would, after they'd gone all the way through the entire tour and the thing in the house and the gift shop, at the end would suddenly turn to their wife or girlfriend and go, "Wait, you mean this stuff is real?" There was always that group away. "Wait, I just thought it was a show. What is happening?" And so there's that audience too. But I always thought that was very funny. People would get dragged out to the sites and go, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And that's what I've seen this year now, even with the less audience that we've had, we are seeing so many more TV fans coming in, and then, okay, now, so what was real? And then you get them onto a book, to Bill's book or something like that. And then they want to know the real stuff. And then those, again, with the books that are coming out and saying, well, now there was a TV show or something, because, again, they're a generation removed and aren't into watching reruns like the rest of us. And it's been fun to really see a lot of that this year. Phone calls. I'm watching the TV series. Now, where did Albert go to? And then you explain that and share it back and forth. We get a lot of that here, especially because, of course, we're the town of the TV, the town of the, everything there. And this year has been huge, with also families that are coming in and saying, "Yep, we just bought the series. Yep, it was on this channel, so we're watching it from beginning to end. Oh, we have these 2 seasons. Let's buy 2 more." It's been really big this year, and I've noticed it here more than other years when I've had twice as many people in. This is the year for the books, the TV, the family time. It's been great.
Something interesting that's happened this year that it's going to touch a bit about what Alison brought up. About this time of year, I start getting a few press phone calls because I've done research about winters and classifying them and winter severity. So people like to talk about how severe the winter is going to be. And this year the calls are different. More than ever, the calls aren't just talk to me about winter severity. It's how is this like the long winter? How can the long winter teach us about getting through this winter and about having hazards on top of hazards? You know, a winter is a hazard, a pandemic is a hazard. When you layer them, hazards get worse. Just like over the summer when there was the pandemic plus hurricanes, and that made everything worse with the hurricanes and pandemic. But we're getting that more and more, that tie between even the weather. Like, these are strictly weather stories, bringing this piece of the long winter and Laura Ingalls Wilder into it. And in a way, I've been researching that nexus for about a decade, and I haven't gotten calls like that until this year.
Okay, so let's move on and talk about how should literature, music, and theater arts enlarge upon Laura Ingalls Wilder's work to keep it relevant and meaningful for adults and children as we look for guidance and inspiration for the future?
I'd like to just throw it here quickly. I think we need to see much more about Rose, frankly, and I would love to see that documentary done about Rose, or even a theatrical approach, a narrative approach to this dynamic between this mother and daughter that was so powerful. And I think that would add. I think people would love it. I mean, certainly fans would love it. But they are an interesting pair of people that I think have a dramatic quality to them that would extend into the mass audience and would perhaps draw people to Laura and her books through the telling of the story of the mother and the daughter.
Oh, it's a Netflix special waiting to happen, Dean. I fully agree. I also think the first thing that came to mind with that question is Linda Sue Park and the Prairie Lotus. That we need more of the retelling of the stories in a more inclusive format to bring in some others who felt isolated from the perspective of Laura Ingalls Wilder, but can gain something from a different perspective. I would love to see more books like hers, more like Sarah Miller's retelling Caroline, which is the story from Caroline Ingalls' perspective during Little House on the Prairie. These are creative fiction, very, based on varying degrees on Laura Ingalls Wilder's or the Ingalls family's lives. And these kinds of stories, I think, bring these new audiences to connect in that way that maybe lets them lead in just a little more into that history and a little more into that background and what Laura Ingalls Wilder brought to our culture.
And I would like to touch a little bit about that. We've been called numerous times every year, just people asking, about the different prejudice, the racism that shows up in the Little House books. And we must remember that it was a completely different time, place, and culture. It was not appropriate, but it was written in the 30s and 40s. It's not something to ignore, but we have to teach our children about this. And we get calls. I know even the local school has contacted us, different teachers, asking, how are we to teach the kids about this? What's a good approach? And there aren't a lot of materials yet available for that. Just to have a soft touch, just to very slowly, but keep it very historically accurate about what happened. And I think a lot of parents would benefit from this as well. It's just a huge obstacle that we have to overcome. We're still fighting this today, as we're all familiar with, but it is something that is relevant and that must be addressed.
I mean, Tessa, I think it's a wonderful teaching moment. I think, and for people to see that that our culture has moved from hundreds of years ago to the time that Laura was writing to today, there is a constant evolution. And I think this effort that seems to be out there in many cases to try and cleanse the culture of these things, to suggest that these things didn't happen because it makes people uncomfortable, I understand, I respect that people can be uncomfortable as a result of something, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us all to be better, as opposed to trying to pretend that it never was unfortunate or unpleasant for people. I think we gain much more if we're willing to really look at it, talk about it, and allow children to understand that the culture has moved.
There's a question from Facebook about how do panelists think whiteness frames Laura's writing, and how does her writing frame whiteness now? Anyone like to comment on that?
That's a great question, and I read Prairie Lotus actually during my daily readings, and it was a big hit. Yes, I mean, obviously, because of Laura and her family, as I've said when I've asked people from other countries who say, oh, we love Little House in Sri Lanka or where, and I'm like, okay, this is the most ultimately white American show and books. You are talking about American westward expansion, white people with horses and covered wagons on the prairie. What does this even mean in your country? And they said, no, it's the characters and the values and their emotions, the emotional content. Got them. Because I was like, this makes no sense that you would watch a show. So there is something that overrides it. But it is that. And one of the things that I noticed right away, especially about the Native Americans, when you look at Little House on the Prairie, that one, where they're stealing the land from the Osage. Okay, Laura was actually, 4 when they left there? And children didn't really talk back to their parents in the 1800s. Yet when you read the book, her mother says, blah, 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 Indians, and Laura just turns around and sounds like she's writing a tract on Native American rights and starts saying, no, Ma, you're wrong, blah, 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 which, I'm sorry, a 3-year-old girl did not have that conversation. And even if Laura was 12, she didn't turn to her mother and go, no, Ma, you are mistaken, and start telling her about why the Indians, the Native Americans, and saying things like, but they were here first, and isn't it their land, and isn't this wrong? And Ma and Pa are like, go to bed. But what she does, they tell her to go, they're like, get out, go to bed. And she's telling them, but it's our land. They're like, that's enough, Laura. She put that in there. She didn't have to put that in there, because we know that didn't happen, because she was 3, and that conversation could not have taken place in the 1800s. Yet here in the 1930s, she inserted this conversation between these, again, characters, they're not real, and where Pa and Laura are taking one position against Caroline's position, which is absolutely very bigoted against Native Americans, and arguing for the rights of the Native Americans, saying, but it's their land and we should give back. And I don't think a lot of people were taking that side in the 1930s and purposely writing a chapter of a thing that didn't even happen in order to make this point that there was an argument there and that maybe they shouldn't have been on that land. She didn't have to do that. She could have said, and it was really great, and we killed all the Indians, lived happily ever after. She could have said that, and she did not.
That's a good point. You can see throughout the Midwest and a lot of old newspapers, there was a lot of 1930s, 1940s. It was called Indian News column in Wisconsin by Wisconsin Dells for the Ho-Chunk tribe, that you had Native Americans writing about different issues, and that was very prevalent. It was starting to happen in the 1930s, 1940s. It was more widely known, and people were standing up a little bit more against it and different things at that point. Things were getting published. And so, as you said, Laura, including that, she didn't have to. But she did. I mean, like you said, no one that age would have said anything like that. So. And no one at the time, writing to white children were talking about it.
Big up.
I think it's important to note, as we've watched this movement to erase some of our nation's history, that Mrs. Wilder's work does appeal to an international audience, and one of her largest fan base comes from Japan. When we watch Japanese visitors visit by the droves, and for people who if you were to listen to a lot of the rhetoric, you would believe would have no connection to Mrs. Wilder, but they are very moved. I mean, they cry when they see Pa's fiddle, just as anybody else would. I think we forget to focus on that, and I've really paid in particular attention to those guests who are coming through our door at Rocky Ridge since all of this has happened. And I see such a diversity in ages and ethnic groups, in religious beliefs, just a whole mirror of people who really feel connected to Mrs. Wilder. And I'll say this just to throw this out. Do you know this is the year Mrs. Wilder has received more fan mail than she has in years, from all over the world, and we still get letters. In fact, this is a true story. About 2 months ago, a little boy from Finland wrote to us, and at his school they were to invite a hero to come and eat dinner with them, and he wrote to Mrs. Wilder clear across the world, inviting her to come to dinner, not knowing that she'd been deceased since 1957. And I had the job to write back to him and explain that to him. But we do forget the bigger picture of how many people are really drawn into the personal connection of Mrs. Wilder's stories.
Well, Bill, you've talked about this many times. The U.S. State Department using the long winter following the end of World War II to help the Japanese. It's not the racial. It has nothing to do with the racial. It has to do with the human experience. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Bill.
Well, first I'd like to quell a piece of misinformation. It has been said a little bit too loosely that General MacArthur had something to do with that. Now, I think General MacArthur had a lot of bigger issues during the occupation time of Japan, but what we've been able to ascertain was that his wife loved the books and read them to their son, and there was a little nudge there with MacArthur's office in Japan through the State Department, because the State Department wanted to launch a re-education program with the defeated Germany and the defeated Japan. And they started to publish classic American novels which showed American values, because they wanted to re-educate our defeated countries and show them what America was really all about. In Germany, they had these books available, particularly The Long Winter. That was the first one that was issued in foreign languages. And they had warm rooms, reading rooms, community rooms, where the cold Germans could come and avail themselves of the Wilder books. And Japan, the same thing, The Long Winter. And the museum in Mansfield has one of those rare first editions of The Long Winter that came out in about 47, and they were embraced by both countries. So Wilder was then an international peacemaker through her wonderful literature. I think maybe, how did General MacArthur get into this mix? His office sent Mrs. Wilder a cablegram, probably at the behest of his secretary, to her in Mansfield, and it got reported in the local press that it was from him directly. And so it was a little bit enlarged, but he must have known about this program, and the State Department probably was the thrust that began those translations.
Bill, can I tag on to what you just mentioned? Many years ago at a luncheon in Washington, D.C., as a younger boy, I was seated next to Jean MacArthur, General MacArthur's widow, and we had this very conversation. And it's interesting that you would mention that she read the books to Arthur MacArthur, because she took complete credit for the whole program.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's good to know. You've never told me that. I would love to reach, the son's still alive, but he's very incognito. And I'd like to ask him about that, but I just think he is distancing himself from his famous father, is my understanding.
Look for him in Greenwich Village.
Wow.
Okay.
He's a musician.
Interesting.
Okay. It's been great speaking with all of you tonight. We're going to move on to our final question, our lightning round question. I'm pretty excited to hear all of your responses to this. So, if Laura or Rose were here today, what would the title of their next book be, and what would it reveal?
Whatever happened to the happy golden years?
Okay.
I would like to see her do something like Little Kitchen in the Ozarks and talk more about when she was a farm wife, because that was the biggest part of her life, and you just never hear about that. And personally, I think it's one of the most interesting parts of her life. So,
okay.
I think there would be a book called "You're Doing It Wrong" by Rose Wilder Lane. Explain to everyone how you're just not doing, like, pretty much everything in your life. You were doing it incorrectly, and how she, if you just listen to her, everything would go much more smoothly.
I'd like to see a book about both of them, and it could have a title something like the apple in the tree or the chicken and the egg. Perfect ingredients.
I would like to see, the other pioneer girl and more story on, like, Carrie and the different aspects of her sisters. So Carrie, if you're not all familiar with, she did very well for herself. Mm-hmm. She ended up in Keystone, South Dakota. She's buried in Smet. She really did well and everything. And so a lot of the pieces that we have in our artifacts in Smet came from Carrie's grandchildren. I mean, there's lots of families still out there, not directly, of course, but lots of distant cousins and their relations and different things. And so it would be really interesting to see a little bit more on each of the sisters. I know there was one on Mary Ingalls, her college years, which was perfect. It talked about her time in Vinton, Iowa, but there's so much more available. Something more on Grace even. She was more local to Smet, but there's so much more available to us.
In the true modern style, I would like to see Rose write a memoir and really dig deep and get personal with what the heck was going on in her mind through her life. And related to that, I think it would be fun to have Rose write a Little House-esque series on her childhood and the different moves she made as a kid, and maybe a little fictionalized version of that too.
Bill, do you have a book for us?
Well, first I want to say, in regards to what Barb just said, is everybody is confused with Rose's narrative voice, tone, and mood in the book On the Way Home. As an adult, I read that, and I thought, what on earth is she trying to subtext here? What is she, is it catharsis? What is she trying to tell us? And I got that book when I was a young kid, and it was touted as, the wonderful sequel to the Little House books. And a lot of it I just could not process as a child. I liked the pictures in the book, and the diary was okay, but where Rose did this stream of conscience, I was lost as a young reader. The book that I would love to see is Whatever Happened to the China Shepherdess and Other Pressing Questions. Every place that I go, every museum that's visited, there are certain things that people are fascinated with as far as the artifacts. And I always have to say, we are so amazingly lucky with what still exists from this family that, after all, we're an ordinary neighborhood family. And we have to look at the pluses and not worry about those things that we can't track down yet today.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Well, I'd just like to thank the Walnut Grove Pageant for having this opportunity. You guys have really been doing a great job this year in having special things online, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about it.
In a year when we've had to be so distant, many of us who are friends on this panel haven't been able to see each other in person, so this has been a great treat tonight.
Yeah,
That is.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and thanks to everyone that also tuned in to our Facebook Live and posted comments and questions. We're very glad that we were able to debrief about Prairie to Page with you this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for running this so nicely.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
If a dream could tell a story